So today I want to talk about the do's and don'ts of speed reading. First of all, a quick introduction to the topic of speed reading. A lot of people believe that speed reading is either a skill that you have or you don't have. A lot like photographic memory or eidetic memory. That's simply not true. Just like with photographic memory or eidetic memory, you can train yourself to have at least skills that duplicate that ability, like with the Mind Palace or whatever. And the same is true with speed reading. You can train yourself to speed read. What it would require is simply learning a new method of reading. You can look up tutorials and things like that online, but basically what that is you skip the first and last words of the line altogether, and you learn to read and recognize groups of words instead of individual words, and then you learn to read and recognize just the beginning couple of letters and the last couple of letters of a word, and you fill in the blanks, because your mind is really good at filling in the blanks to words like that. And you can learn to read pages in seconds. I've gotten pretty good at speed reading. But there's cautionary information about speed reading. You do not want to speed read everything, and you don't want to completely avoid speed reading. It has its pros and it has its cons. Do's and don'ts. A time when it's a good time to speed read, in my opinion, is if you see some sort of label or something on someone's clothing or on their wrist or a tattoo. You can quickly read that tattoo and store it in like a mental photograph and then save it for later while you're making your deductions. A time you don't want to speed read, in my opinion, is if you're reading an actual book trying to learn from it. In those instances, it's usually better to, if you want to retain the information for a long period of time, it's usually better to actually just slow yourself down. You don't want to speed read because, as I explained in what speed reading is at the beginning of this video, you're skipping information. And even though your mind is filling it in, and hypothetically that can be a good thing, because your mind is being forced to fill that information in, which is interacting with the information, hypothetically that could be a good thing. But in general, you end up losing a lot of detail when you're reading. So speed reading while actually reading a book is good if you're just skimming the text to refresh it, or skimming the text to try and find a specific point or a specific bit of information. But speed reading just to get through a book, just to get through dozens of books, not actually the best way to retain the information for the long run. The caveat to that is if you use speed reading in conjunction with some sort of a memory method, and you are capable of speed reading and using the memory method to find a middle ground where you can still remember the information even though you speed read. So those are my cautionary comments about speed reading. But I still believe it is even though it has faults and flaws, it's still a good skill worth learning. In the field, it's incredibly difficult to read actual pieces of information, actual words that might be important, especially if you're just walking and passing. So that's when I find speed reading to be its most useful, is when you're walking through a room or a building and you just want to absorb as much information as you can and retain it in like a mental photograph. You read the titles and the information on a magazine quickly. You read the titles of books in a bookshelf. You read information on a person's clothing. You read information on a tattoo or anything like that, and you just store and absorb immense amounts of information through speed reading, and then you store it in a mental photograph, and you can break it down later on. That is in my opinion, when speed reading becomes the most valuable, when speed reading becomes the most efficient, and when it is used at its best. At its worst is when you're just speed reading to speed read. Like any other skill, you don't want to overuse it, because then it just becomes habitual, and you can't even, it becomes habit, and you just don't, to a degree you want deduction to become a habit, but at the same time you don't want it to become a mindless habit where it kind of gets to fly on its own without you controlling it, because then you're going to end up just jumping to conclusions again. And that's kind of the same thing with speed reading, is you don't want to get to the point where you read so fast that you have to reread it because you forgot what you just read. And then you're defeating the purpose of actually speed reading in the first place. But those are my do's and don'ts, my pros and cons of speed reading. I'm sure this is something that can vary with different people. I'm sure there are some people who can speed read entire books in minutes. I've seen people who can speed read pages in a second, like 1-2 pages, and then they go to the next page, and then they retain all the information. So this may not be something that applies to everyone, but as my cautionary information, that is how I would suggest that you use speed reading. That's it for today's video, though. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.